In the last past couple of videos, I've already shown it was unloaded, so you'll just have to take my word for it. But it is. Handguns in Canada for self-defense. Now, I made this video in 2010, 2011, and I think I made a subsequent video after it. And of course, it's been not as popular as I would like it to be, but it is catching on, and people are very, the heated debates are there. And I do get the odd pro-gun person in the sense of that they are firearms owners, they are restricted firearms owners like myself, but they don't think it's a good idea. The one argument that you keep getting is the shootout at the OK Corral kind of one, where it's like, yes, people, if they carried it, the crime rate would just go through the roof. Well, I don't think so. Because the statistics just don't show that in other countries. And some people say, well, yeah, but the statistics in the States are completely irrelevant to here. Not necessarily, because even though we don't have the right to carry here, there is some things that are similar here in Canada. 60 to 80,000 times a year, firearms are used in self-defense here in Canada. 1 in every 1,000 is a shooting, 1 in every 8,000 is a fatality on average. 1 in every million legal gun owners does something stupid. In the States, the number is just a little bit higher. 1.5 million to 3 million people on average every year. It fluctuates from year to year that defend themselves in self-defense, with all the other things, 1 in every 1,000 is a shooting. Most people, just showing the gun is enough to scare people straight. So the thing is the law-abiding people are law-abiding people. The people that, you wouldn't issue allowed to carry a gun already are. The bad guys, yeah, they already got them. And that's the whole key, is that criminal is an occupation. You can't legislate crazy. And you can only deal with these people when they show up. And yes, I believe that we will be able to get the right to carry if enough people just start calling their MPs and MLAs. And you've got to make it a vocal issue. I mean, it has to be a grassroots movement, and it also has to be done properly. Where I would differ from the United States is that, yes, I would keep the background check, not because I believe it makes anybody any safer, but for liability reasons only. Meaning, if somebody sells you a gun, it was okayed by the RCMP, so then it's bad on them. You'll see, once the liability shoots back to the RCMP for okaying things, you'll see the background check disappear pretty quick. The next one is training. Although I believe people have the right to self-defense, because it's just a natural given right, the tool of choice, whether it be your bare hands, a knife, a baseball bat, bear spray, or a gun, to me is really irrelevant, because how you choose to defend yourself is not so much what tool you use, it's do you know how to use that tool. Now, training I would put at the top priority. Yes, the difference between police officers and law enforcement, police officers and military is basically training. The difference between civilians, law enforcement, and military is training. That's it, meaning people can be trained to use guns for self-defense. I would not allow a carry permit, which I would keep a permit. Yeah, okay, the government gets to, make a bit of money off of you, but people would, you could put that money towards victim services, you could put it towards police services, you could put it towards a lot of different things. Just a small, inexpensive course, a 1-day or 2-day course. I prefer a 2-day course, so people could use, fake guns, such as this one here. It's not fake, it's a BB gun, but they could use this in a training scenario, under, obviously under a trained, instructor. Okay, and on the second day, a proficiency shoot on a range somewhere where you have to, qualify like police do. That's it. I mean, when you look at the civilian contractors that go overseas, they usually get about 2 days training. That's it. Some of them will get a week's training, but most of them it's just like, okay, well, you're not a frontline soldier. You just need to be able to know how to shoot back, and shoot your way to safety. And you can learn that in 2 days. Guns are not that difficult to learn how to use. Any monkey can do it. To do it under stress and be proficient at it, well, there's where I would be different for the right to carry than the States. You would have to do a proficiency shoot, say, at least once every 6 months, on your own dime, whatever. At a certified police range or whatever. Just so it's like, okay, yeah, here you go, even make it a public service, whatever, say, okay, this guy showed up, he wants to qualify, he qualifies, he takes the course once in his life, he qualifies, and as long as he qualifies, he can keep buying a permit maybe once a year, once every 6 months, details to be worked out. But I would call it a deputized citizen program. And on top of that, I might even have some extra things tacked onto that, such as some sort of an identification badge or something. Something that people won't confuse you for a police officer, but most importantly, the police officer won't confuse you for the bad guy. That type of thing. Will it be perfect? Well, I mean, I'll say it a million times over. If you need one of these to defend yourself, that's about the only thing that's going to work. The bad guys, they just show up, and criminal is an occupation. So pretty much every argument I hear against it, and you have to understand, I started out at this from an anti-gun for self-defense stance, meaning I grew up around rifles and shotguns and stuff like that, and I love them, I probably learned how to shoot before I could walk, that kind of thing. But for handguns, for years, I didn't think it was a good idea. Now, getting back into trapping in the past 5 years, I had a Charlie Brown moment where I slipped on the ice, and I was like, geez, glad I didn't have my rifle on my back. It'd be nice to be able to have a handgun for that. And I wasn't really 100% sure at that point if you could legally own handguns. So I started looking into it, and it's like, okay, yeah, you can. Because I had no interest in handguns whatsoever. None whatsoever. I liked them. I thought they were neat. They were cool. But I just, was like, well, if I'm going to go hunting, I'm going to grab the rifle, right? And as a trapper, it's like, well, hey, these things really they'd be perfect for trapping, and then I started thinking, I was on the trap line one day, and I started thinking about that after my Charlie Brown moment. I started thinking, in the States, they carry these things around all over the place. I'm like, that's kind of crazy. I mean, what happens if somebody cuts somebody off in traffic? They're just going to start shooting at each other. It'd be open season everywhere. So I started to look into it. And you know what? That's the total opposite. And I'm going to throw a statistic at you, and this is going to completely go against any sort of logical belief. Stefan Molyneux brought it up, and when he brought it up, it was just like, it just goes against all logic. You are safer if your attacker has a gun than a knife. You're better off if your attacker has a gun than any other weapon. I know this sounds the most illogical thing, but with one of these in their hands, they do not fear you whatsoever. But with a knife, often they'll cut you. Just it's the way the statistic lands. Again, the nice thing about the statistics is it does dispel some of the myths that carrying these things around is a bad idea. But again, when we look at the crime rates, and these are FBI stats, these are CIA, these are also the UN, these are also Stats Canada. All these things, they do add up where it's like, okay, well, people use these things for self-defense from time to time. But when we look at how they're used here in Canada versus how they're used in the States, well, the numbers really don't change that much on a lot of things, but on some things they change drastically. For example, most of our anti-gun legislation, as I call it, Bill C-68, comes from the Polytechnique shooting. Almost everything that we do now is because of the laws that were brought in, because many things got banned. But our gun control started back in 1898, where at the time you could have a handgun in your house, or you could have a handgun anywhere. But at the time, you had to have a permit to have a handgun in your house or business for self-defense. But other than that, you couldn't take them anywhere. But you could own Tommy guns, you could own rifles, you could own shotguns, you could own anything up to about the 1950s. And then in the 1960s, they got us to convert our full automatic machine guns to semi-auto. And then they started banning most of them in the 1970s. Handgun hunting was allowed in the 1970s. And you know what? Guess what? The crime rates really haven't dropped where people were hunting with these, because there was no crime rate where people hunt with these. The crime rates weren't dropping, where people just own guns. It was where the crime was happening due to gangs and stuff like that. So in the 1970s to now, since 1977 to now, the firearms-related homicides and stuff, all that's been dropping. Typically, less than 200 people per year get murdered with firearms. Almost 80% of all homicides are suicides. They count them as a homicide. And even since Bill C-68 came out and we've been locking them up, the suicide rate by firearm has been going down, but the suicide rate in itself has not been going down. So people just find other means. And that's a great caliber, a very tragic thing, a great way to calibrate, the availability of guns and their use and what they're used for. Well, crime is the same thing. Even if you can't get a hold of these, they'll use something else. They'll use a knife, they'll use a bat, they'll use whatever. So at the end of the day, what you're really stuck with is that it's really about human intent. So again, let's get back to carrying these around. If I don't think you really need so much, extreme permits and stuff like that. A course, the same way, first off, you'd have to take the basic courses that you take now. I do support safety courses. I really do, especially with firearms, regardless of size. Do you need a handgun course and a long gun course? I'd put them all in one, but that's just me. Because you really learn the same thing twice. Except for the handguns, you get to handle them a bit more. Okay, so we'll say 2-day course for that. We'll leave that the same. After that, barrel length, and name, reputation, that. I would allow machine gun ownership, not to be carried around, but in another course, just because for the safety factor, take a machine gun course. But for a right to carry course, I would have a 2-day, first day just scenario with plastic guns. After you've taken your other courses that you're not somebody who's just learning how to shoot. You already know how to shoot. Then from there, you take your scenario shoots, the way the police train, military, they train with fake guns in the scenario, and then from there, I would the next day I would have a qualified shooting. So if you don't qualify, you can't carry it around. And then of course the penalties, enforcing the penalties for people who don't comply with the law. But I would make it very accessible for most people, because statistically, 300,000 women last year in the States used firearms in self-defense. Those are the ones that didn't get raped, stabbed, or end up on the side of a milk carton somewhere. You know what I mean? Those women did that, along with 1.5 million about 1.5 million other people used firearms in self-defense, whether it was a home invasion or out on the street, in a mall, in a bank. They did that. And all you have to really do is research armed citizens. And I know there's some people, it's just, they can't, they think, even, and this came from a pro-gun guy, and I do, appreciate people's comments on stuff like this. But he said, I'm a restricted firearms owner. He says, carrying around just so we can have the right to kill people. You've completely missed the point. It's not about that. The last thing you ever want to do, if you're a law-abiding person, is ever shoot anybody. That was one, and that was a great point, though, because it's one of the very first points that I say most people don't even question, is what if you had to pull the trigger on something? Well, as a hunter and a trapper, and I've never shot a person, never want to, but I do know what kind of damage these things can do against four-legged critters. Therefore, it was, could you do that? In a self-defense, you really have to think about it like that. It's like how final this thing can make things. This is a widowmaker for somebody. Not this specific one, but you get what I'm saying. So that was the very first question, and it is the most important question. Could you, and if you had to, how would you deal with that? So, and I think there's a lot of people that live in fantasy land. They don't really realize the kind of holes these things can make. It's messy, it's bloody, and it's noisy. I've seen a bear shot. That's all I got to say. I've shot deer. Deer don't make noise, but it was still gory, and I shot them with a rifle, But bear, they make a lot of noise when they die. You got somebody that you shot, they're going to make a lot of noise, unless you just drop them on the spot. And most of the times, they usually don't just drop on the spot. That's why you just got to shoot a few more times. But the average civilian doesn't shoot that most of the time. Just the showing it is enough to deter. And when people know that these things are in wide available use for self-defense, that becomes a natural deterrent where people just say it's just too dangerous to be a criminal. However, if the odd crazy man shows up, you've got something to deal with them with. That's it. Other than that, what are you going to do? Spit at them? So that's the first question. But the thing is no, it is not about the idea that I'm going to go around and shoot people with it. The idea is that if somebody were to, even if it's so statistically impossibly low, okay, what if? It's the, like your house burning down. If you were stuck in a hallway where the only path to safety had big gaping flames, engulfed in flames, you would want a fire extinguisher with you. Well, if you had Adam Lanza in front of you, you would want one of these in your hand. But you would definitely need the training to use it. And that's one of the things I can't stress enough. Not everybody's going to make the grade, But to me, I'm convinced from all the statistical data that it shows 30 to 40% crime rate drops when people have the right to carry. There's some towns in the States where it's mandatory to own guns in your house, which I think is really cool. Just to be safe, I'll buy like 2 or 16 of them, or maybe 92 of them. I don't know, whatever. I'd like to be thorough, I like guns. Yeah. But I think even from people that do shoot, it's still warming up that idea that, okay, why would you leave your own personal safety up to somebody else? Police officers don't have ESP when the bad guy knows who, where, and when. I've known people that have been murdered. And you got to ask yourself, what if? Would they still be here today had they had a chance? And the people that benefit the most from carrying and being able to defend themselves are usually black youth because of the gangs, and women and elderly. They're the most vulnerable in society. Usually get, particularly women and elderly, usually benefit the most. So, to me, it can be done very easily. A lot of people think that police officer and military training is so extravagant that the average citizen could never do that. Depends if you're doing it as an occupation. Yeah, you're going to be getting up at 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock every morning doing that. For a military guy in law enforcement, you're going to train really hard because you're more likely to be in those scenarios than the average civilian. But if it were to happen, enough training, a day's course, there's enough right to carry courses in the States that they've learned how to do it right. And these courses are knowledge, and that knowledge is a skill, and those skills can save lives. If the unfortunate happens that you have to shoot, well, at least you'd know how to do it. But if the unfortunate happened that you had to shoot and you're not, as of now, you're not allowed to do it, well, you're at the mercy of your attacker. Because at the end of the day, you will be the first responder to your attacker. That will not change. So hopefully I've kind of touched some of the issues that people have been commenting on. Again, for it or against it, I do appreciate the comments, all that. But again, we can make this happen, but we need for sure to call our MPs, our MLAs, make it an election issue. We need to get it out front and center. Eventually, I'm going to plan a march in Ottawa, obviously unarmed, but just to create awareness of it. Whether I'll do it this year or next year, I don't know. These things do take time, and there's a lot of details I want to work out and stuff like that, but I'll keep you guys posted. So anyway, rate, subscribe, definitely comment, and share if you like it, and most importantly, call your MPs and MLAs. Links will be down below. Okay, hi and welcome. This is unloaded. In the past couple of videos I've already shown it was unloaded, so you'll just have to take my word for it. But it is. Handguns in Canada for self-defense. Now, I made this video in 2010, 2011, and I think I made a subsequent video after it. And of course, it's been not as popular as I would like it to be, but it is catching on, and people are very, the heated debates are there. And I do get the odd pro-gun person in the sense of that they are firearms owners, they are restricted firearms owners like myself, but they don't think it's a good idea. The one argument that you keep getting is the shootout, the OK Corral kind of one, where it's like, yes, people, if they carried it, the crime rate would just go through the roof. Well, I don't think so. Because the statistics just don't show that in other countries. And some people say, well, yeah, but the statistics in the States are completely irrelevant to here. Not necessarily, because even though we don't have the right to carry here, there is some things that are similar here in Canada. 60 to 80,000 times a year, firearms are used in self-defense here in Canada. 1 in every 1,000 is a shooting, 1 in every 8,000 is a fatality on average. 1 in every million legal gun owners does something stupid. In the States, the number is just a little bit higher. 1.5 million to 3 million people on average every year. It fluctuates from year to year that defend themselves in self-defense. With all the other things, 1 in every 1,000 is a shooting. Most people, just showing the gun is enough to scare people straight. So the thing is the law-abiding people are law-abiding people. The people that, you wouldn't issue allowed to carry a gun already are. The bad guys, yeah, they already got them. And that's the whole key, is that criminal is an occupation. You can't legislate crazy. And you can only deal with these people when they show up. And yes, I believe that we will be able to get the right to carry if enough people just start calling their MPs and MLAs. And you've got to make it a vocal issue. I mean, it has to be a grassroots movement, and it also has to be done properly. Where I would differ from the United States is that, yes, I would keep the background check, not because I believe it makes anybody any safer, but for liability reasons only. Meaning, if somebody sells you a gun, it was okayed by the RCMP, so then it's bad on them. You'll see, once the liability shoots back to the RCMP for okaying things, you'll see the background check disappear pretty quick. The next one is training. Although I believe people have the right to self-defense, because it's just a natural given right, the tool of choice, whether it be your bare hands, a knife,